When the girls had gone, Aslan laid his paw, and though it was velveted, it was very heavy, on Peter's shoulder, and said, "Come, son of Adam, and I will show you a far-off sight of a castle where you are to be king." And Peter, with his sword still drawn in his hand, went with the lion to the eastern edge of the hilltop. There a beautiful sight met their eyes. The sun was setting behind their backs. That meant the whole country below them lay in the evening light, forest and hills and valleys, and winding away like a silver snake, the lower part of the great river. And beyond all this, miles away, was the sea, and beyond the sea, the sky, full of clouds, which were just turning rose color with reflection of the sunset. But just where the land of Narnia met the sea, in fact, at the mouth of the great river, there was something on a little hill, shining. It was shining because it was a castle, and of course the sunlight was reflected from all the windows which looked towards Peter and the sunset. But to Peter, it looked like a great star resting on the seashore. "That, O man," said Aslan, "is Cair Paravel. Of the 4 thrones, in one which you must sit as king. I show it to you because you are the firstborn, and you will be High King over all the rest." And once more Peter said nothing, for at that moment a strange noise woke the silence suddenly. It was like a bugle, but richer. "It's your sister's horn," said Aslan to Peter in a low voice, as low as to almost be a purr, if it's not disrespectful to think of a lion purring. For a moment, Peter did not understand. Then, when he saw all the other creatures start forward and heard Aslan say with a wave of his paw, "Back! Let the prince win his spurs," he did understand, and set off running as hard as he could to the pavilion. And there he saw a dreadful sight. The naiads and dryads were scattering in every direction. Lucy was running towards him as fast as her short legs would carry her, and her face was as white as paper. Then he saw Susan make a dash for a tree and swing herself up, followed by a huge gray beast. At first Peter thought it was a bear. Then he saw that it looked like an Alsatian, though it was far too big to be a dog. Then he realized that it was a wolf standing on its hind legs with its front paws against the tree trunk, snapping and snarling. All the hair on its back stood up on end. Susan had not been able to get higher than the second big branch. One of her legs hung down so that her foot was only an inch or 2 above the snapping teeth. Peter wondered why she did not get higher, or at least take a better grip. Then he realized that she was just going to faint, and that if she fainted, she would fall off. Peter did not feel brave. Indeed, he felt he was going to be sick. But that made no difference to what had to be done. He rushed straight up to the monster and aimed a slash of his sword at its side. That stroke never reached the wolf. Quick as lightning, it turned around, its eyes flaming and its mouth open in a howl of anger. If it had not been so angry that it simply had to howl, it would have got him by the throat at once. As it was, though all this happened too quickly for Peter to think at all, he had just time to duck down and plunge his sword, as hard as he could, between the brute's forelegs into its heart. Then came a horrible, confused moment, like something in a nightmare. He was tugging and pulling, and the wolf seemed neither alive nor dead, and its bared teeth knocked against his forehead, and everything was blood and heat and hair. A moment later he found that the monster lay dead, and he had drawn his sword out of it, and was straightening his back and rubbing the sweat off his face and out of his eyes. He felt tired all over. Then after a bit, Susan came down the tree. She and Peter felt pretty shaky when they met, and I won't say there wasn't kissing and crying on both sides. But in Narnia, no one thinks any worse of you for that. Quick! Quick! Shouted the voice of Aslan. Centaurs! Eagles! I see another wolf in the thicket. There, behind you! He has just darted away. After him, all of you! He will be going to his mistress. Now is your chance to find the witch and rescue the fourth son of Adam. And instantly, with a thunder of hooves and beating of wings, a dozen or so of the swiftest creatures disappeared into the gathering darkness. Peter, still out of breath, turned and saw Aslan close at hand. You have forgotten to clean your sword, said Aslan. It was true. Peter blushed when he looked at the bright blade and saw it all smeared with the wolf's hair and blood. He stooped down and wiped it clean on the grass, and then he wiped it quite dry on his coat. Hand it to me and kneel, son of Adam, said Aslan. And when Peter had done so, he struck him with the flat of the blade and said, Rise up, Sir Peter Wolfsbane, and, whatever happens, never forget to wipe your sword. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Faithful Fables. I'm your host, Lauren Cowenhoffen, and today we're continuing our dive into The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but our focus will be on High King Peter. We're going to take a little bit of a look at Peter today, and before we get into it, I just want to say thank you guys for the continued support. This is episode 4, and the previous 3 episodes, guys, I'm happy. I'm very happy with the support. Thank you so much. And remember, guys, there's a link in the description of this episode where you can support the show. And with this link, you can choose from the various amounts. And honestly, guys, if you can't afford it, don't do it. And honestly, you don't have to do it at all, but it would mean a lot to me if you did. It would help to keep bringing this content to you. And you can also leave me a message. There should be a send me a message or leave me a message link, something like that, if you have a comment or something you'd like to say. And I may just read it on a future episode. Same goes for my viewers on Spotify or my listeners on Spotify. You guys can also leave comments on Spotify directly, and that would work the same way. So, that being said, let's talk about what I read in the opening. So the part that I read from was apart from chapter 12, which is actually called Peter's First Battle, and that's kind of what I wanted to focus on. I feel like this was one of the biggest things for Peter in this book, and really kind of just set the tone for the kind of person that he was going to become. Now, I mentioned in the episode I did on Aslan called The Lion. If you haven't heard that yet, make sure you go back and listen. But I mentioned that Aslan actually put Peter in a unsafe position here. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I find it's often sometimes when we're in these unsafe or even uncomfortable positions, that's when we have a chance to grow. And I mean, of course, if we choose to. And I believe from what we'll see here, Peter definitely chose to step up and to grow in this situation. So, but before we get there, backing up a little bit, they are on the eastern edge of the hilltop. The sun is setting behind them, and the whole country below them is in the evening light. The forests, the hills, the valleys, and the lowest part of the great river winding away like a silver snake. I want to repeat that because this is some very nice imagery. I think I'm kind of summing it up here, but the sun is setting behind them. The whole country below them in the evening light, the forests, the hills, the valleys, and the lower part of the great river winding away like a silver snake. And then, beyond this, miles away, was the sea. And beyond the sea was the sky full of clouds, which were turning a rose color from the reflection of the sunset. This is beautiful. This is beautiful imagery. I think we've all seen sunsets, right? And like how the clouds can turn them like that reddish, orangish color, like in this case, a rose color. And at the mouth of the great river, there was something shining on a hill. It was a castle that was shining from the sunlight, reflecting off all the windows. And to Peter, this looked like a great star resting on the seashore. And that castle was Cair Paravel, where one day Peter and his siblings would rule as kings and queens of Narnia. Now, something from this, other than the imagery that I just kind of thought of, was it mentions that it's miles away was the sea, and beyond the sea. It's mentioning this sea, and I think there's significance, to Cair Paravel being by the sea. And I think what that significance is that Aslan comes from beyond the sea. Like Aslan's country is, out beyond the sea, right? And so I think that's kind of the significance of that. And we'll see that a little bit more in Prince Caspian when we get there. But I believe that is a significance to think about when it comes to Cair Paravel being on the sea. So we see Aslan showing Peter the kingdom that he will one day rule. And at this time, Peter is told that he will be the High King because he is the oldest of the four. And it is important to note that Aslan also took Peter alone to see this. Peter was the first person that got to see Cair Paravel. He was the first person that really got this one-on-one time with Aslan. And when I say first person, I mean of the four siblings, of course. But Peter says nothing in this moment, and I imagine that he would be speechless. I mean, between the beautiful sights that they're seeing, and of course what Aslan is telling him about being High King, like, I would have been speechless too. And I mean, especially for Peter being young at this age. He is actually 13 years old. But then suddenly they hear a sound, and it's Susan's horn. She was in trouble. Earlier in the book, on their way to meet Aslan, the children met Father Christmas, and Father Christmas gave them all gifts. Of course, Peter got, as we'll talk about a little bit later, he got a sword and a shield. Susan got a horn that whenever she was in trouble, she was supposed to blow this horn. So she's blowing this horn, and she was in trouble. So, I mean, Peter didn't understand this immediately. I feel like he was still processing everything with Aslan telling him he's going to be High King, and then now there's this new thing happening that also needs to be processed. I feel like maybe there's just a little bit of overwhelm that's happening, and he's just kind of maybe a little bit frozen. The other creatures start to move in, but Aslan tells them to stay back and to let Peter earn his spurs. And then Peter, suddenly he understands. He's like, oh yeah, this is my job. This is my job to do here. So he sprints to the pavilion, and that's where the sound came from. So he's going over there. And Peter, he needed to do this if he was to be High King. Like I mentioned earlier, this was something that he needed to do this in order to become the person he was to become. Now, I mean, I think it was still his choice. I think if he froze up or he was too scared and he didn't continue through with this, I think obviously Aslan or some of the other creatures would have saved Susan. But it was important for Peter to choose this. And I think what helped was Aslan actually telling the other creatures to not do it, to stay back and to let Peter do it. I think that helped him realize, like, oh yeah, this is my duty. And so there would be many more battles yet as well in his life. And he needed to do this. This was the first step. So we see Lucy running fast towards Peter. Her face is white as paper. Kind of reminds me of the White Witch. But obviously I'm not making a connection there. I'm just the description of that with her face being that white. Anyways, Susan runs and climbs up a tree, and he can see that there's a huge gray beast behind her, and He thought, of course, it was a bear, but it was actually a wolf. And the wolf is snapping at Susan, snapping its jaws. He's trying to get her. Her leg is hanging down only an inch or two above the wolf's teeth. And it's time for Peter to do something, and fast. Now, it's interesting how Peter is thinking of this in the moment. He sees this and wonders why she didn't climb higher, or at least get a better grip. But then he realizes that she's going to faint. And this would have been bad if she were to faint, and because she would have fallen. And the implications of her falling out of the tree would mean that the wolf would probably kill her instantly, and the prophecy would not come true. Now, I don't think Peter was thinking about the prophecy not coming true in that moment, but I wanted to highlight that this is what it would mean if that were to happen. Although Aslan was there, so I suppose that at the same time he would have stepped in to save her, but he's allowing Peter, obviously, to take care of this. This was Peter's first time doing anything like this. I imagine that at his age, the sword itself would have been terribly heavy, but C.S. Lewis mentions that Peter did not feel brave. He actually felt like he was going to be sick, but it made no difference to what needed to be done. Now, I relate to that. I relate to, when I do have anxiety or I'm stressed, some of the big symptoms that I get is feeling sick and wanting to throw up, nauseous, whatever it may be, just not feeling the greatest. And so I totally get why Peter would feel that way. Now, I mentioned in episode 1, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Narnia is not an allegory since there's not enough one-for-one comparisons, but I think I found another example of this. Now, obviously, Aslan is Jesus in this world of Narnia, but what is happening to Peter here actually reminds me of Jesus in the garden before he goes to the cross. Now, like Peter in this moment, Jesus was also anxious in the garden, and he was actually so anxious that he was sweating drops of blood, and he asked God if it could be done another way. Now, this is not a one-for-one comparison, but Peter was also anxious in this moment. He felt sick. But with Peter and Jesus, even though there was anxiety, it made no difference to either of them, to what needed to be done. They both understood and went forward with what had to happen. I mean, they both understood, like, although this is how it feels, if it could be done another way, great, but nope, this is what's happening. We've got to do it. And so Peter rushed the wolf and slashed the sword at his side, but he missed. And I like that this was a detail that was mentioned because it's not likely that he would hit the wolf first try, especially if he's never swung a sword before. He's never had any training, and of course his age. The wolf took time to howl. The book says that he was so angry that he took time to howl, and then he goes after Peter. And now, unlike before, Peter had no time to think at all, and he plunges the sword while ducking into the wolf's heart. He's laying there on the ground, the wolf on top of him, and the wolf's teeth are actually pressed against Peter's forehead. And C.S. Lewis describes that everything was blood and heat and hair. Now, I imagine it's a hot day under the sun. There's this wolf on you who is also very hairy, very furry, which is providing extra heat, and it's heavy. And there's blood, hair everywhere. It's just a very uncomfortable position, I imagine. And then Peter realizes that the beast was dead. Now, finally, we know what's happening. There was a little bit of confusion there. And Susan comes down from the tree. Peter and Susan are both feeling shaky, which I understand. I imagine that this was a very traumatic thing for both of them to experience, and for Lucy as well, having just seen it all happen. Then, brother and sister share a really sweet moment, and I mean, he just saved his sister's life, and so it is nice to see the love between siblings. There was crying and kissing, and Lewis mentions that in Narnia, no one thinks less of them for that, and of course, remember, they are 13 and 12 years old when this happens. Aslan reminds Peter to clean his sword. Peter blushes when and then wipes his sword clean on the grass. I like that he blushed. It's like he was almost embarrassed that he forgot to clean his sword, as if like this was a regular thing you should do and you should know it. But yet, why would Peter know it? This was a totally new experience, but he was almost like, oh shoot, I should have cleaned my sword. Oops, sorry. And it just adds so much realism to the characters, which I appreciate C.S. Lewis for doing. It makes them more real, which is nice. Another reason it can't be an allegory. But anyways, I digress on that. I mentioned in episode 1 that Aslan does things with his hands that normal big cats don't do. And again, you can go back and listen to that. But there was another one now that I just remembered, and it was that he asks Peter to hand him his sword. And so Peter does it. He kneels before Aslan, and Aslan knights him. Now, how you knight somebody is you with the sword you on their shoulder, and you use your hand. So Aslan's using his paw to do this. And even at the beginning of this section that I read, Aslan's paw is on Peter's shoulder. So we're seeing more and more things that he's doing with his hands that normal big cats like lions and like just don't do. But he knights him Sir Peter Wolfsbane. Now, obviously, the name Wolfsbane, that comes from obviously he killed the wolf. But now he is a knight, and Aslan makes sure to tell him that no matter what happens, to never forget to wipe his sword. And again, I think that's just such a interesting part about this. Something that we would just not have thought of. Even if they didn't even mention the wiping of the sword, we wouldn't have thought anything of it. Like, I wouldn't have been reading the book thinking like, wait, I wonder if he wiped his sword after. But I just like that C.S. Lewis decided to mention that. It's just like, I just would have never thought of that. All right, now I wanted to give you guys kind of like an overview of Peter, talk about some basic information about him, into his backstory, and then kind of his journey through Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But first, I want to start off with some key characteristics that I've noticed from Peter throughout the book. The first is that he's loyal. So he's loyal to his family. He's very supportive of Lucy when she comes out of the wardrobe for the first time and she's telling them about it. He's very supportive. He doesn't believe her, but he also doesn't completely dismiss her. He knows that she's 8 and it's okay to pretend. And even though, so now when they get into Narnia, all of them, he was mad at Edmund. I feel like most of the book he was pretty mad at Edmund, but even though he was mad at Edmund, he was still able to have good conversation about how to get home. Even though there was tension between the two of them, they were able to have a fruitful relationship in some ways. And then not the last thing, but when they realize that Edmund is gone, so they're at the Beaver's Dam, all of a sudden Edmund's gone, and he's gone to see the witch. Peter's worried about his brother, and he suggests that they go look for him, even though he is a little beast, as he said. This was the same day that he was really mad at Edmund. And so we see that he's loyal to his family, that even though he's mad at Edmund and there's tension between the two of them, he still cares and he still wants to go look for him. And he loves his sister Susan. And as we just talked about, he saves her from that wolf attack. And the last thing, this is kind of under loyalty, but it's also, I would say that it shows his humility. Peter ended up being a very humble guy, and he actually gives Edmund credit for winning the battle at the end of the book. He gives Edmund the credit, and it reminds me of a Bible verse. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Philippians 2 verse 3. Now, I picked this because it talks about humility, thinking about others higher than you, and selfishness, or not being selfish and not doing things out of selfishness. Now, I want to say, like, being humble doesn't mean putting yourself down either. I think sometimes people get that confused, where they think, like, if I'm going to be humble, I need to put myself down, but that's not what it is. And I think this is a good explanation of what it looks like to be humble. And it just reminded me of Peter giving Edmund credit, because Peter could have taken the credit, and he didn't. And the other kind of characteristic I want to focus on with Peter is that he is courageous. Throughout this book, we see multiple scenarios where Peter is courageous, obviously with coming to Susan's aid and killing the wolf. That took a lot of courage. And also, even before that, he wants to meet Aslan, even though he's frightened. He's frightened to meet Aslan, probably a bit unsure, but he has the courage to still want to meet him. Another thing is, even though he was nervous and he felt sick with the wolf, right? That whole thing with the wolf must have taken courage, even though he was not feeling brave and probably not courageous either. He also led the battle into the war, and he fought bravely. So bravery, I would say, is another good characteristic for Peter, but courage and bravery, I'm kind of lumping those two together. And I found a couple verses that kind of reminded me of this. Obviously, I mean, when we think about courage, we think of Joshua 1 verse 9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And the other verse that I found is actually in Isaiah 41 verse 6, which says, everyone helped his neighbor and said to his brother, be of good courage. And I picked that one because I think that just reminds me of Peter. I think, we see Peter willing to help others, and he's also an encouragement. He was supportive of Lucy and these things. And I think that it was just a good thing to sum it up. And so, that being said, those were two of the biggest characteristics that I noticed for him. Obviously, there's more, but I wanted to focus on those two for now. So now a little bit of Peter's backstory, and kind of also, I guess at the same time, kind of like a timeline of events throughout the first book here, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So Peter Pevensie was born in London in 1927. He has 3 siblings and is the oldest of 4. Some of this, by the way, will be repetitive because I've already been mentioning it, and I feel like it's needed, though. Repetition is important. Remember that. Anyways, he's 1 year older than his sister Susan, 3 years older than his brother Edmund, and 5 years older than his sister Lucy. Now, he was 13 years old he was 13 years old, and I know I already mentioned that a bunch. 13 years old in 1940, and that's Earth years, by the way, when the Blitz happened. Now, the Blitz was a Nazi Germany bombing attack on London that happened during World War II, and as a result of this, Peter and his siblings were sent away from London for their safety. They were sent to the house of Diggory Kirk, who, in case you don't know, we will learn about in The Magician's Nephew. When they get to the house, Peter is excited to explore the house. And as the oldest sibling, I feel like he knew what was going on. So maybe he was trying to distract his younger siblings by exploring, playing games, whatever it might have been. Lucy goes to Narnia, and when she comes back, Peter says that what she was describing was childhood fantasy. And when all 4 children make it to Narnia, the truth comes out that Edmund had also been there before. And we get the sense that Peter was possibly disappointed that Edmund had been lying about this. And I can see, as an older brother, for one, now that they were there themselves, he probably felt bad that he was saying, yes, he supported Lucy in the sense that for her age, like, it's okay to make believe, it's okay to pretend, but he did think it was a childhood fantasy. But I'm sure that when they got there and he was there for himself, he must have felt pretty bad. He must have felt pretty bad about himself. And then obviously as an older brother, having learned that your other like Edmund, lied about his time there and denying it and all that, I'm sure as an older brother, you'd be pretty disappointed as well in your sibling. And being the oldest sibling, obviously there's a sense of leadership that he has as well. And we see Peter is like overall a leader, even as we see into their adult years and everything, as we'll talk about. But he's a leader, and as they get into Narnia, we see Peter taking that role as a leader and being the oldest child. He's worried about having enough food, and he realizes that even if they go back through the wardrobe, there's no guarantee of returning again, and that shows us that he was using good logic, which earlier in the book, the professor, Diggory Kirk, told them to use logic. And so the children meet the beavers, and they're told about the Golden Age prophecy and that they're in grave danger because of this. So now I imagine, first of all, you're meeting a giant talking beaver. Okay, that's the first thing. I mean, all of this must be just overwhelming, just magic and mystery. And like, how is any of this possible? Am I in a dream? Like, these are just some of the things that I'd probably be thinking. And now you're told that you are the fulfillment, you and your siblings are a fulfillment of this prophecy that this magical world has. And you're going to put an end to the reign of this evil witch and all this, 1,000 year of winter. Like, this must be overwhelming. Like, I would be overstimulated, honestly. I'd be like, hey, I can wake up from this dream anytime now, please. Yeah, so they're in danger. And Edmund goes off on his own to see the witch, and Peter gets worried and wonders what they're going to do. Now, on the way to the stone table to meet Aslan, Peter, Susan, and Lucy are visited by Father Christmas, who gave them gifts, as I mentioned earlier. Now, Peter was given a sword with a golden hilt, which was later known as the legendary sword Rindon. Yeah, I had a typo in my notes, but it's Rindon. And he was given a shield with the crest of a lion. Now, Father Christmas tells him that these are tools and not toys, and that they'd soon be useful. Now, I don't know, I guess Father Christmas probably also must have been aware of the prophecy. I mean, he was banished from Narnia, so he must have been aware of this prophecy, and so seeing them, he must have put two and two together. I mean, he probably would have given them gifts anyways, but I mean, he knew that they were going to need to use those gifts because he knew, like, they're going to have to go to war. And I mean, they were. I mean, he needed even sooner than the war because he needed to kill the wolf to save Susan. And so after that, Edmund gets rescued by a search party and is brought back to the stone table. Aslan actually ends up making a deal with the witch to die in Edmund's place. And so they move the army from the stone table to the fords of Baruna. This is around the area where the battle actually happens, and it's known as the Battle of Baruna. But on the way there to the fords, Aslan tells Peter his plan for defeating the White Witch. Now, Aslan also tells Peter to lead the army in his absence. And he doesn't really say much more than that. He's very unclear about what this means. I imagine Peter is probably confused because he's thinking he's going to fight alongside Aslan. And probably the thought of fighting and being in an army is probably also terrifying. I mean, yeah, he's gotten a little bit of a taste of it now with fighting the wolf, but that's different from the creatures that are going to be in that war. And sure, you're part of an army, but I imagine you're not ready for this. You probably feel like you're not ready for this. And then Aslan tells you to lead the army in his absence. It's like, whoa, tell me more, please. Give me more info. What do you mean? Where are you going? What's happening? And he doesn't tell him. And Peter leads the army, charges into battle, which was won when Aslan returns and kills the White Witch. Now, I kind of mentioned this, I think, in a previous episode, but anyways, I don't know if Peter and Edmund, and we'll talk about this more in the episode I do on Edmund, but I don't know if they ever knew what Aslan actually did for them. Like, so Peter heard that, okay, Aslan, he's going to be absent, but I don't know if they, at this time at least, knew that Aslan made that sacrifice. Like, he might have, because Aslan did come with the reinforcements, right, from the creatures he restored from stone. He came with those reinforcements. They might have just thought like, oh, he was just getting reinforcements this whole time. Okay. So I don't know. It's just something interesting to think about. But Peter fought bravely in the war, and a 13-year-old leading an army, yeah, he had to be brave. He had to be courageous. And when Peter was talking to Aslan about the battle afterwards, he gives Edmund credit for the battle, saying that they would have been beaten if not for him. And so this was a really sweet moment. Obviously, we touched on it before, really humble. Peter finally gave Edmund the recognition that Edmund was longing for. And with all that they went through, he was able to forgive his brother and fight alongside him in battle. He loved his brother no matter what and wanted everyone to know what he did. He wasn't even trying to give him the credit. It had just become something he did naturally. He just naturally gave him the credit. And he knows where the credit was due, and he was going to give it. And that is something that I really respect about Peter. He was willing to give people credit when they needed it, when they deserved it. After the battle, Peter and his siblings were crowned kings and queens of Narnia. Now, something I found interesting, which literally in between sessions of recording this episode, I was rereading this chapter when this happens, like chapter 17, the last chapter. I noticed something. So from the battle, after the battle ends, they spent that night in the fields or wherever they were. Aslan, by the way, also forgot this in the Aslan episode, because I just kind of remembered this now as I was reading. Aslan, it says that he provided food for all of them, so the whole army, everybody. And C.S. Lewis said that how he provided food for all of them, I don't know. That right there was a key thing I wish I had added to the episode on Aslan, but does that not remind us of Jesus feeding the 5,000? And like people not knowing how? Like, oh man, when I read that, I smiled. Like, it made me happy. I was like, I love that connection. But, so they spend the evening there, and then literally, it's a 2-day journey to Cair Paravel, and then the next day they're crowned. So 3 days? Are we seeing another connection here? Like, I was always kind of wondering, like, okay, Aslan, it wasn't like he rose again in 3 days, but here's where the 3 days comes in. It was the third day after the battle, you get crowned. So, guys, I love finding these little connections. Even if they're last minute or I have to add it in another episode, I will do that when I find a connection, because, guys, this is so cool. I love this. I love making this podcast. And I hope you guys love hearing it. So the book describes Peter as becoming a tall, deep-chested man and a great warrior. So, that first step of him killing the wolf and then leading the battle, this led to him becoming a great warrior. And I'm glad it did. He was called King Peter the Magnificent. That was what they called him. And Peter and his siblings ruled Narnia for 15 years, and they worked day and night to bring Narnia back to its former glory. Peter himself, fought in the army, and he helped get rid of the remainder of the White Witch's loyalists. I guess there were still some that were kind of on her side running around, and so they got rid of them. He then sailed the Eastern Ocean on a ship called the Splendor Highling, and visited the islands of the Narnian Empire that had unfortunately become neglected. He helped establish an alliance with the neighboring country of Archenland and opened up diplomatic channels with the southern country of Calormen. And in Narnia year 1014, King Peter secured the extreme northern regions of Narnia from the northern giants. During his reign as king, Narnia was brought to a time of peace and prosperity, making this known as the Golden Age of Narnia. Guys, this is such a beautiful summary. Just seeing what he all did in those 15 years. And the book doesn't go into detail. This book doesn't go into detail about it. It just kind of lists them, gives a little detail here and there, but you kind of get the picture that like he and his siblings, like they did great work for Narnia in those 15 years. And it's really cool to see. And so now one day, he and his siblings, they set out to hunt the legendary white stag. I think it was Mr. Tumnus. I think it was Tumnus who kind of tipped them off that like, okay, it was seen here, like whatever. So they go out to hunt it. Now the white stag, from my understanding, is a white deer of sorts. So in Narnia, the white stag is a mythological creature, obviously, but its main thing is that it would grant wishes and quests. And so, yeah, according to legend, whoever would catch the white stag would have their wishes granted. And so some symbolism here that we could draw out just be that there's hope and there's unknown. Its appearance often signals a significant change or the beginning of a quest. And basically the legend, though, of the white stag is that it's granting wishes. It's a common element throughout all of Narnian lore. And yeah, it motivated the four siblings to go on this hunt for it. Obviously they're kings and queens of Narnia. Sorry, I'm stumbling a little bit. They're obviously already kings and queens, but to hear that this thing could grant you wishes, I mean, why not? Why not go try to catch it? You know what I mean? Like, why not? And then you'd probably become even more popular with your people and everything if you've now conquered this white stag. So they go out to hunt the white stag, and while they're out doing that, they come across a familiar but yet vague sight, a lamppost. Now, I'm going to end this chapter by reading the last part of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And so I'm going to do my send-off now, and then we'll close the episode with the reading. So I want to thank everybody for listening. Now, I really appreciate it. Now, go check the description for all my links. Leave me a message or support the show. Get a shout out in a future episode. But guys, most importantly, I want to say thank you. Now, before I read this last part, there is only one other thing to say. Stay faithful. So they lived in great joy, and if ever they remembered their life in this world, it was only as one remembers a dream. And one year it fell out that Tumnus, who was a middle-aged fawn by now and beginning to be stout, came downriver and brought them news that the white stag had once more appeared in his parts. The white stag who would give you wishes if you caught him. So these 2 kings and 2 queens, with the principal members of their court, rode a hunting with horns and hounds in the western woods to follow the white stag. And they had not hunted long before they had sight of him. And he led them a great pace, over rough and smooth, and through thick and thin, till the horses of all the courtiers were tired out, and these 4 were still following. And they saw the stag enter into a thicket, where the horses could not follow. Then said King Peter, for they talked in quite a different style now, having been kings and queens for so long, Fair consorts, Let us now alight from our horses and follow this beast into the thicket. For in all my days I never hunted a nobler quarry." "Sir," said the others, "even so, let us do." So they alighted and tied their horses to trees and went on into the thick wood on foot. And as soon as they had entered it, Queen Susan said, "Fair friends, here is a great marvel, for I seem to see a tree of iron." "Madam," said King Edmund, "if you look well upon it, you shall see it is a pillar of iron with a lantern set on top thereof." "By the lion's mane, a strange device," said King Peter. "To set a lantern here where the trees cluster so thick about it and so high above it that if it were lit it should give light to no man." "Sir," said Queen Lucy, "by likelihood when this post and this lamp were set here, there were smaller trees in the place, or fewer, or none. For this is a young wood, and the iron post is old." And they stood looking upon it. Then said King Edmund, "I know not how it is, but this lamp on the post worketh upon me strangely. It runs in my mind that I have seen the like before, as it were in a dream, or in the dream of a dream." "Sir," answered they all, "it is even so with us also." "And more," said Queen Lucy, "for it will not go out of my mind that if we pass this post and lantern, either we shall find strange adventures, or else some great change for our fortunes." "Madam," said King Edmund, "the like foreboding stirreth in my heart also." "And in mine, fair brother," said King Peter. "And in mine too," said Queen Susan. "Wherefore, by my counsel, we shall lightly return to our horses and follow this white stag no further." "Madam," said King Peter, "therein I pray thee to have me excused. For never since we four were kings and queens in Narnia have we set our hands to any high matter, as battles, quests, feats of arms, acts of justice, and the like, and then given over, but always what we have taken in hand, and the same we have achieved." "Sister," said Queen Lucy, "my royal brother speaks rightly, and it seems to me we should be shamed if for any fearing or foreboding we turned back from following so noble a beast as now we have him in chase." "And so say I," said King Edmund, "and I have such desire to find the signification of this thing that I would not by my good will turn back for the richest jewel in all Narnia and all the islands." "Then in the name of Aslan," said Queen Susan, "if ye will all have it so, let us go and take the adventure that shall fall to us." So the kings and queens entered the thicket, and before they had gone a score of paces, they all remembered that the thing they had seen was called a lamp-post, and before they had gone 20 more, they noticed that they were making their way not through branches, but through coats. And the next moment they all came tumbling out of a wardrobe door into the empty room, and they were no longer kings and queens in their hunting array, but just Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy in their old clothes. It was the same day and the same hour of the day on which they had all gone into the wardrobe to hide. Mrs. Macready and the visitors were still talking in the passage, but luckily they never came into the empty room, and so the children weren't caught. And that would have been the very end of the story if it hadn't been that they felt they really must explain to the professor why 4 of the coats out of this wardrobe were missing. And the professor, who was a very remarkable man, didn't tell them not to be silly or not to tell lies, but believed the whole story. "No," he said, "I don't think it will be any good trying to get back through the wardrobe door to get the coats. You won't get into Narnia again by that route. nor would the coats be much use by now if you did. Eh? Why's that? Yes, of course you'll get back to Narnia again someday. Once a king in Narnia, always a king in Narnia. But don't go trying to use the same route twice. Indeed, don't try to get there at all. It'll happen when you're not looking for it. And don't talk too much about it, even among yourselves. And don't mention it to anyone else unless you find that they've had adventures of the same sorts themselves. What's that? How will you know? Oh, you'll know all right. Odd things they say, even their looks will let the secret out. Keep your eyes open. Bless me. What do they teach them at these schools? And that is the very end of the adventure of the wardrobe. But if the professor was right, it was only the beginning of the adventures in Narnia.